Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Today we're going to go over my pairings for my degenerate flying calf marches.
Eagles! The Eagles are coming!
Okay, now that we've got Elio in the game and I've had a chance to test him out, I've come up with the 4 marches that I intend to use, as my primary flying cav, degenerate marches here, right? You can see, obviously, I have still a lot of work on Elio to do here, right? I only have him 4-starred up, but that's because he's only level 33. I'm in home kingdom. I have no real urgency to level him up completely right now. I'll just use him to grind Darklings until my KVK actually starts. You can see where I've got his skills too. Now, I sort of bought out the Elio event, and this is sort of where you get his skills too. Obviously, the distribution will be random. I think the 4 skill here is the second best skill you want to go for. So ideally you want to go 5, 1, 1, 5 to start out with, but you'd have to be pretty lucky to get that. The other thing I'll mention is that in the first video, the last video I did about his second skill here, it turns out there's a tooltip error on this, right? So the aerial effect, the second effect here, I was really critical of this because the way it reads, it says basically this guy can't do counterattacks to ranged ground legions when the aerial is active. Fortunately, that's what the tooltip says, but it's not as bad as that. This last line here, that you can't launch counterattacks against ranged ground legions, only triggers when you get that 10% chance to miss, right? So if a ranged ground legions attack you when aerial is effective, they have a 10% chance to miss, good. And if they do in fact miss, then you don't counterattack them, right? So that turn, basically, neither of you does damage to each other. I mean, that's okay. That's honestly pretty underwhelming, but at least it's not a huge negative like the way the tooltip reads. Okay, so these are the pairs that I'm going to be using this season. A couple things very quickly. The artifacts, these may be the artifacts I use. They are very good artifacts. They are my best cav artifacts. They're all exemplars, so it's a pretty good chance I'm going to use them. I haven't put a ton of thought into the artifacts, but yeah, probably. Maybe I'll swap out who has what, but expect to see these 4 artifacts with my flying cav. On the other hand, the war pets, these are not the war pets I'm going to use, other than the Berserk Phaedric. That's sticking with Frondel for sure. But these other 3, I already know I'm going to make some changes. And the bottom line is I need to do some additional thinking about the war pets. And I also want to make a separate video about the war pets just to, milk this flying cat for as much as I can get. So these war pets, they're going to change. Look for a video on them in the next several weeks. Okay, let's go through these heroes one by one, and I'll show you the skill tree and my sort of rationale for the talents for each of these heroes as we go through them. Okay, we'll start with Frondel. He's my first commander, and I have Frondel paired with Craig. And so one of the great things about Frondel is he can get to 76 movement speed all by himself. When he's the commander, he gets 20% march speed. So you got to get 56% from his movement tree, right? And a couple of your flying heroes give you no movement speed whatsoever. Like Craig has no default movement speed. One of his skills give you sort of like movement speed after a battle ends, but like who cares about that? You need the default movement speed. Craig gives you no default movement speed. So I'm going to have to pair him with someone that fills the need all by himself, and that is Frondel for me. Okay. So let's go over his talents here. And like I said, the thing he really wants to do is inflict debuffs on the enemy because that powers up the Berserk Phaedric. He does a very good job of that. His talents give you a bunch of fierce marks to begin with. So in this talent tree, I'm looking for 2 things. One is I got to get 56 movement speed from the talents. And second, I got to put debuffs on the enemy, right? So you can see I've got the 6% here. You can narrow 5% from the foundational talent, 15% from the the cav tree. So that's nice. So I'm 26% there. I got to go all the way up the PvP tree to get the 10% there, the 10% there, and then I get another 10% just from starting out the control tree. All right, and once I've done that, I've sort of made the movement speed I need to make. Okay, so after that, it's all about getting debuffs. Definitely take Cyclone skill because that inflicts slow every time you do a rage kill, so that's great. I like Blindside because it inflicts a 30% march speed debuff when I come into combat. Not only that, only the target I hit, but still one target that I'm hitting probably can't run away for a few seconds, and by the time, these 10 seconds are up, I probably have like some other ability to stop them. And then I put 1 point both into ambush and 1 point into tremble in order to get the debuffs there. Right now, if you only put 1 point into these, the effect is lower. So instead of like a 5% reduction in defense, I only get a 1% reduction. Kind of same thing up here, 1% reduction in attack. So I'm not really here for the debuff. I'm here for the stack, and a 1% reduction in attack or defense gives you the same stacks of Fierce Mark. And so that's why I have 1 point in each here, right? I would love to be able to get Reticent and put the silence on the enemy, which itself is a debuff, but I just don't have enough skill points in the talent tree. So anyway, that's how I built Fondle. Okay, so my second pair here is Seluna and Elio. This is the one I struggle with the most because I thought these guys would both be primary commanders, basically because they give you so much movement speed with their skills, and they are sort of your best flying cav commanders after Frondel. You look at Seluna here, her fourth skill gives you 30% movement speed when she's flying, which is really good. And then Elio here, it's a little annoying because he gives you 10% base movement speed and then an additional 15% after he charges up. So if you put these guys together, it's 40% at base and a maximum of 55%. And the reason I decided to put them together is if you look at Elio here, he does so much skill damage. His rage skill does 2,400 skill damage, single target, really strong. And then his fourth skill here does another 800 skill damage when combat begins. And I'm like, man, Selena here, she's got the skills tree. That benefits skill damage so much. I'd really love to put these guys together so that Elio, his real strength here, could benefit from Selena's skill tree. The thing about Seluna is, even though she gets 30% from her skills, her trees here, her talents don't give you a lot of movement speed. And so I figured, okay, I'm going to go all the way down the skills tree. I'll have these two together. Their skills will do most of the work in terms of movement speed, and then I'll take advantage of the skills tree here to do as much to have these guys hit as hard as possible. All right, so let's look at the talent tree here. Obviously, we have the 6% at the bottom. The foundational talent does not give you any movement speed. It does give you more healer skill damage, which is nice. So we go up here, and the real strength here is, in fact, the skills tree, right? So the bottom of the skills tree is fine. 4% is nothing major here. Head held high. You don't really love held high for Cav generally, but this is the best talent here. Boiling Blood is not as good as you might think it is. The 8% damage, because Elio sort of like he puts a dot on the enemy that ticks for 3 seconds. This 8% essentially only helps the first round, so it's not as amazing as you think, right? But once you get to the higher level here, it's awesome. Detached gives you 8% more hero skill damage. That's awesome. It's a cost of 4% normal attack, but who cares about that? 8% skill damage from a single, level is awesome. Focus here, honestly, isn't that amazing. A 10% chance to increase my hero skill crit for 10% for 5 seconds, and it's okay. What I love is steady hands. Whenever I get a buff effect, I have a 20% chance to get 10% hero skill damage for 5 seconds, and it can only trigger once every 5 seconds, so you can't stack it, but you basically get this rolling. You're going to have it up most of the time. Really powerful, because these two actually do a lot of buffs. We'll talk about that in just a second here. Thirst for Blood versus Caged Animal. Caged Animal is better for a long fight, and Thirst for Blood is better for a short fight, which is why I want Thirst for Blood, right? So this gives me 60 damage factor, per rage skill, so 120 damage factor per time through the target. It's okay, but it is better than sort of the slowly stacking thing. This is sort of better for a mage. I think this is better for Cav because, you're not going to have that many rage cycles before you either kill your target or you move on. Okay. So with the leftover points to go up the PvP tree, pretty obvious here, get as much movement speed as I can. 5% skill damage, so a little bit better than Intimidation. Love that. These stack. That's great. Army of Valor isn't great because I don't expect to be in combat for very long, but like this, luck of the draw is not really great either. So I figured, all right, Army of the Valor. And with my last point, I put into overall speed to try and get that moon speed up as much as possible. My end state when I have everything complete is I want these guys to move a little bit faster than 76 and when they have everything ramped up, and a little bit slower than 76 when they just start out. And hopefully that'll balance them out as much as possible, given Elio's sort of like annoying fluctuation here. Okay, the last thing I said of the buffs, Elio himself gains a couple buffs here. When he gets max movement speed, he gets Cloud Piercer's Mark, and then he can, of course, he can get Aerial whenever he's, in an area that Ground Legions can't reach, or when he's awakened if he does skill damage. The other thing is that Seluna gets a lot of buffs here. She gets the Luna Moth Mark, which is a buff. So that last talent in the skills tree should be very good for these two. Okay, my third march is Thea with Bay Horn as the deputy. This is sort of the asterisk march. I was going back and forth on who I want to be the primary and who I want to be the deputy. I eventually decided I wanted Thea to be the primary under the theory that I want this to be a rage generation machine. Even though Cav usually get their rage from the unyielding rush charge, if these guys are in combat for a while, I want the rage cycle going off all the time because Thea's shields not only helps her but helps nearby legion. And then Bayhorn, like his skill damage is pretty low, but it is AoE. So I figured, hey, like in a long fight, I want this guy going off as much as possible. So I eventually went with Thea as the primary, and one of the benefits is that when she casts a shield, you get a 15% hero skill damage boost, and then it ends the next time a rage skill is cast. So if she's the primary, you get the shield, you get the 15%, and then Bayhorn gets 15% on the first target, right? On the first rage cast. If you have it the other way around, he doesn't get the 15% the first time. Thea puts the shield up, you get the 15% for the second and every subsequent time, but like that's not as good. You'd rather front load the damage, particularly with Cav. Okay, so let's go over her talent tree here. And like I said, the idea here is I want her to be a rage generation machine. And I should mention both Thea and Bayhorn give me 20% movement speed, so I need to come up with another 36. So I get 6 right there. That's pretty easy. I'm going to go up the PvP tree to get 20 from these two skills, and then I'm going to go the overall tree to get my last 10%, right? So that's how I get to 76. The key to this build is really Unrelenting Fury. Every time I gain a buff effect, I get 15 rage. And so I'm built this off to get as many buff effects as possible. Obviously, I'm going to get a little bit from their skills. In addition to their skills, this tree is really built out to get as many buff effects as possible, right? So Guardian Angel gives me a resistance when I enter the battle, so that'll give me a little additional rage there. Maybe not the greatest, right? Because if I'm charging an archer, if I'm charging a mage, I'll have a full rage bar anyway. But, if something else happens, then I can get Guardian Angel, like I have to charge an enemy cav unit or an infantry or something like that. Okay. Then I go up the top here, and sort of much similar to Frondle, I put 1 point in Slow and Steady and 1 point into Avoidance. This gives me a little bit of buff. These buffs aren't amazing, but the point of these buffs isn't that them themselves, it's that they will trigger Unrelenting Fury and give me 15 rage, okay? Other than that, I've basically gone with rage generation as much as possible, and when I ran out of rage generation, I went with skill damage. Not that these guys do a ton of skill damage, but they certainly do more skill damage than normal attacks, so that's what I'm going with for them. Okay, my last march is Atheus and Fragar. This is pretty clearly my weakest march. Atheus does no skill damage because his skill damage factor 800, not very good to begin with, but on top of that, it's magic. So because I have physical troops, he's literally going to do no damage with his rage skill. And then Fragar's rage skill will work, but it's only 800 damage itself, so not that impressive. So very little skill damage. Their main function is to provide me some additional weight and particularly give me the Warhammer I love. Greymar's Warhammer. I've been singing the praise of this thing for seasons upon seasons. The Exemplar gives you a 6-second stun. Love that. Their job is to carry the Warhammer, stun the enemy, and then all my other marches will do the damage. Okay. So let's go through the talent tree here. Fragar herself gives you no movement speed, so I need all 76 from Atheus. He gets 20% from his skills, so that's good. So I got to get 56% from his talent trees. Luckily, I can do that. 6% from the bottom here, and another 5% from his foundational skills. So I need 45 more. We're going to go up a little bit the PvP tree. You get 10 there and 10 there, so I'll need 25 more. And then I have the mobility tree, right? 10 there, 10 there, and 5 there. And now he's at 76. Really, that's the point of this tree. There's not a lot else going on here. He does no skill damage, and Fragar does very little, so I never took any skill damage itself. But like, hey, I guess I might as well take head held high, so you can get his rage skill off as much as possible. Yeah, not that impressive, but like I said, this is more of a utility march to give me some additional weight. And the great thing about Atheus is he can get that 76 movement speed all by himself. All right, and those are my four, flying cav marches to start the season. Like I said, artifacts not 100%, but it'll probably be something similar. On the other hand, war pets, they're going to change a lot. I'll have another video about that in the future. Okay, and just as an out here, some quick channel news. It's summertime. That means I'm about to be traveling. So a little bit, slower on the uptake. I still have access to Discord. I'll still have access to the game, but if you try and contact me over the next week or so, expect a little bit of a slower response than usual. Anyway, that's all I got for today. And until next time, you stay classy, Belaron.
Thanks for your time.